Hey guys, welcome to Y&R Daily Update YouTube channel. Today's topics: the Young and the Restless spoilers. The secret that Claire had guarded so carefully, the identity she had constructed like a fortress brick by brick, was beginning to crack. For so long, she had carried herself with poise, calculating every move, controlling every breath she released in the Newman household, so that no one would suspect the truth that lived beneath her surface. She had studied Victoria's every nuance, mirrored her gestures, absorbed her patterns until it seemed natural for her to call herself daughter. She had convinced the world of her place, stitched herself into the fabric of the family name, and silenced the whispers that had once questioned her bloodline. And yet no amount of preparation could withstand the moment when Cain Ashby looked at her with eyes sharp enough to pierce through her carefully woven disguise. Cain had always been a man who thrived in shadows, a survivor of betrayal and schemes, someone who understood the power of secrets better than anyone. For weeks he had been circling Clare, watching her movements, sensing something in the way she flinched when certain questions arose, in the way she pressed too hard to prove her loyalty, where others were soothed by her soft-spoken pledges of family. Cain saw a mask. And then finally, he found what he was looking for, a trace of her past. A thread that led back to the identity she had tried to bury. In his hands now was the weapon he needed, a truth sharp enough to cut her to pieces. When Cain confronted her, Claire felt the floor fall from beneath her. The composure she had maintained shattered in an instant, and the fury in her eyes was laced with terror. He had unearthed what she had sworn never to reveal. That she was not Victoria's child at all, that she had lived under another name, another life, and that life included a husband. Somewhere out there was a man who had once claimed her, and, worse, a man who was still searching. She had hidden herself so deeply, changed her name, erased every trace, and yet Cain's words struck her like a knife. He knew, and he would not stay silent. The revelation left Claire trembling, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum of panic. She had believed her secret was buried, that even Reed's suspicion could not dig deep enough to uncover it, but Cain was different. He was relentless, opportunistic, and merciless. He did not care about her tears or the desperation in her voice. He cared only about the leverage this gave him. And in that moment, Claire realized that her life, her identity, her fragile place in the Newman empire now rested in his hands. Cain's threat was cold, clear, and devastating. If she did not bend to his will, he would bring her husband to Genoa City. He would let the truth spill out in the boardrooms and living rooms where the Newmans ruled, and every illusion she had crafted would collapse. Her claim to Victoria's love, her tentative bond with Nick, her fragile acceptance by Nicky, all of it would dissolve into betrayal once they discovered she had been living a lie. Worse still, her husband's arrival would drag with it the past she had fought so hard to bury. A past stained with fear and choices she could never explain away. The weight of the threat crushed her. And yet, somewhere beneath the tears, fury ignited. Claire wept openly, the sobs breaking her voice. But in her heart there burned a rage at the injustice of it all. She had clawed her way into survival, reshaped her life, and tried to create something new for herself, only to find her efforts dismantled by a man who saw her pain as an opportunity. Cain's demand was not spoken aloud, but it lived in the silence between them. He wanted her loyalty, her obedience, perhaps even her betrayal of those she claimed to love. He wanted a pawn inside the Newman walls, a puppet to dance whenever he pulled the strings, and she, trapped by the fear of exposure, was forced to consider his terms. Claire cried until her body shook, the sound echoing through the halls that once made her feel safe. But in her mind, a different war raged. Should she yield to Cain, sacrifice her dignity and her autonomy to protect her secret? Or should she defy him, knowing that defiance would unleash a storm that might obliterate her completely? She thought of Victoria, of the tentative bond she had built, and of Reed, who had already looked at her with suspicion in his eyes. If Reed discovered Cain's revelation, if he learned that she was not truly his sister, but an imposter who had stolen her place, he would tear her apart in front of the entire family. Subscribe our channel for more latest update. And Victoria, could her mother's love survive such a betrayal? Or would she cast her out forever, banished with nothing left but the ghost of what she had once pretended to be? The cruelty of Cain's position was that he did not care either way. He thrived on the destruction of others, on pulling strings until they strangled those too weak to resist. His smirk, his calm certainty made Claire want to scream. She hated him, hated that he had cornered her, hated even more that he had the power to do so. Her tears, though real, masked the depth of her anger. She would cry in front of him because that was the role she was forced to play. But inside her soul burned with humiliation and a growing resolve that she would not remain his pawn forever. In that moment, Genoa City shifted once again. The game was no longer only about Reed's secrets or Victoria's heart. It was about Clare's very identity. Kane's discovery meant the stakes had risen beyond repair. A single word from him could unravel her completely, and every relationship she had worked to build would collapse like a house of cards. Yet even in her despair, Clare's mind sharpened. If she could endure this, if she could outmaneuver him, perhaps there was a way to survive without surrendering everything. But if she failed, if Kane's threats materialized, then her life in Genoa City would end in ruin. And so she cried, broken in appearance, but beneath the sobs there was fire. Clare would not forgive. She would not forget. And though she was cornered, now, the day would come when she would turn the blade back on Kane. For every threat, he whispered, she would carve her own path toward freedom, even if it meant destruction. The war between them had only just begun, and Genoa City would pay the price when their secrets spilled into the open. She was furious in a way that did not flame outward, but burned inward. A steady white heat that hollowed the air in her chest, and made the smooth routines of each day feel like glass underfoot. And yet Clare understood there was no escaping the life she had stitched together. Unless she wanted it ripped apart in front of everyone she had worked so hard to convince. Survival demanded compromise, and compromise demanded an answer now. So, she did what the cornered do when the trap closes and the jaws are already biting down. She agreed to Kane's secret. She agreed because the alternative was annihilation, because the past she had buried would be dragged into the bright rooms of Genoa City and named because the lie that kept her safe would be pronounced a lie in the mouths of people who would never forgive her. The agreement did not sound like a bargain so much as a sentence read out with calm precision. She would feed him the currents that moved behind the walls of Newman. She would become the quiet tide that eroded Victor's footing grain by grain. She would carry signals between rivals without leaving fingerprints. And in return, Kane would keep his knife, she and the man hunting her, her husband, at bay. If she failed, he would open a door she could never close again. She gave him that assent without looking away, not as surrender, but as a down payment on a future where she would outlive this humiliation and one day take back what he stole from her. Now yet the moment the word formed in her mind, she felt the cost settle on her bones like winter. Kane had wanted a throne for longer than anyone knew, had tilted at Victor's empire with blunt force and smiling finesse, and always somehow fallen short of ruling anything larger than his own appetites. But the dream did not die because men like him feed on the fantasy of arriving in a room and having everyone turn toward them with a hush of respect. He wanted to be the man people quoted. The man whose signature made markets shake. The man whose name was spoken softly in restaurants and loudly in boardrooms. The man who, when he walked into society or the athletic club, collected nods, like tribute. He told himself that was leadership, that he would govern cleaner than Victor, fairer than Jack, fiercer than Billy, that he would be the axis around which Genoa turned. But the attitude he carried, sharp with condescension, quick to threaten, impatient with loyalty he hadn't earned, guaranteed that the homage he craved would curdle into compliance purchased by fear. None of that self-awareness touched him. He believed this was the moment finally engineered to deliver him the crown. He had mapped it as a campaign with phases and yields. Isolate Victor's judgment by starving him of clean intel. Inflame old rivalries between the Abbotts and the Newmans, so every ally looked like a liability. Seed the market with whispers that the patriarch had lost his edge. Subscribe our channel for more latest updates. Nudge a boardroom vote, from confidence to interim review. And when the structure wobbled, be there with a portfolio that suggested stability, and a smile that promised nothing would change except who signed the orders. For that, he needed a lever, inside Victoria's orbit that moved quietly and carried weight, and now he had one in Clare. The deal, when translated from threat into work, was simple in description and merciless in scope. Clare would surface the patterns that never reached press releases, the friction between Victoria and Nate over what constituted risk versus vision. The private concerns Nikki expressed about reputational exposure. The rotations of Victoria's calendar that signaled where capital and attention would migrate next. The anonymous briefings Nick sometimes commissioned to sanity check acquisitions. The moments when Reed's return unsettled strategy because personal life bled into corporate reflex. She would flag the meetings that mattered, the closed-door pre-briefs that always preceded the public agenda. The names on draft memos that revealed who was being elevated and who was being isolated. She would nudge conversations where Kane needed them nudged. A quiet question to a mid-level counsel about bylaws. A soft suggestion to a communications aide about timing. A raised eyebrow in front of the wrong person at the right moment to make them rethink an alignment. She would move one step beyond observation into orchestration by introducing delays where speed would help. Victor and accelerants where patience would have blunted risk. A vendor suddenly needing one more compliant signature. A regulator conveniently asking for supplemental information the week a vote was scheduled. A rumor about a competitor's counteroffer seated in the exact corridor where it would reach an executive who could not resist gossip. And she would, when asked, signal vulnerabilities Kane could monetize devastatures floating in back-channel conversations. Talent poised to defect philanthropic initiatives large enough to draw scrutiny if someone hinted they masked tax strategies. Demanded redundancies to prove her usefulness, a second set of credentials for a staging environment that mirrored. Production systems, a burner phone with check-in windows. Disguised as meditation reminders, a list of 3 journalists who would take anonymous calls if a story were gift-wrapped with enough verifiable detail. Every deliverable arrived wrapped in the same unspoken clause. Miss any of this and the man you married will be standing in the lobby asking for you by a name this town has never heard. She stepped into that machinery because she saw no path around it, yet she carried into it a private calculation that curled tight and would not let go. Confession is strategy. There was a version of the next week where she walked into Victoria's office and told the truth in one breath. Not the whole ledger. Not the labyrinth of how she had crossed continents and erased herself and built a persona strong enough to stand in front of the Newmans without shaking. But the essential fact that would either end everything or save something. She had a husband. He was looking for her. She had chosen safety over marriage. And the woman standing in front of Victoria was trying to build a life that would not leave her hunted anymore. It was a path strewn with explosives because if Victoria believed that the daughter she had claimed could hide a vow that binding, then all the softer lies would be reweighed and found heavier. If Victoria chose mercy, it would be a mercy walked back the instant those around her called it weakness. Clare looked down that path and then at the path she was already on and saw that both ended with her bleeding. The choice was about where the cut happened and who watched. Into that uncertainty walked Kyle, not with accusations, but with the unnerving sensitivity of someone who sees when your smile is a fraction late and your posture is a degree too straight. Someone who can tell the difference between distraction and dread. He had watched her grow steadier in Genoa City, and then without warning to him watched that steadiness tremble. And the questions he didn't voice were heavier than the ones anyone else dared to ask. The city has a way of magnifying secrets the moment they are shared, even with a single person. And Clare discovered quickly that the circle of knowledge had widened beyond anything she intended, not because she spoke, but because pressure leaves residue that other ambitious souls can read like fingerprints on glass. Audra noticed the micro-hesitations near the subject of legacy planning and drew a line from them to a theory about succession shored up by external influence. Subscribe our channel for more latest update. Phyllis caught the phantom of a surname whispered by a concierge, who hadn't meant to say anything and carried that puzzle away like a cat with a ribbon. Billy forever nosing at fractures he can leverage, for a storyline that puts him above the people he wants to beat. Overheard Kane on a call at the athletic club and did the math that tied Clare in volatility and an approaching storm and read less detective than Sun, but exquisitely tuned to the falselessness that creeps into rooms where love and fear share air sensed in Clare. A tension that confirmed everything he already suspected, and nothing he could yet prove. Secrets do not remain singular in Genoa City. They sprout imitators and shadow stories, and before Clare could isolate the contagion, versions of her truth were drifting through lounges and back offices and text threads that burned as soon as they were read. Victoria felt it before she learned it. The way mothers know when the room has shifted because their child's eyes are a little too bright, a little too flat, and the distance between sentences fills with a soundless plea. She watched Clare move through the day with a precision that normally meant control, and now looked like a woman trying to keep a dozen plates spinning while one of them already had a crack she couldn't ignore. Victor noticed it and catalogued it without sympathy because the discipline of his life has always been to see fragility as something to guard against, rather than to cradle. And he filed the observation under risk until it could be weaponized or dismissed. Nate noticed and tried to fold his concern into strategy because love for him is often indistinguishable from the desire to fix the variables that make other people hard to manage. Nikki noticed and prayed through it the way she prays through every new tremor with a private courage that does not need to announce itself to count. Kyle did not pray or strategize. He worried. He worried because Clare flinched when a number she didn't expect lit her phone because she kept a small jewelry box in the back of a drawer and never opened it because he found a foreign ATM receipt in a side pocket of her bag from a city she didn't claim to have visited because a news alert about a missing person in a state 2 time zones away made her stare too long and breathe too shallow. He worried because when he said her name softly in the corridor one afternoon, she didn't answer at first. And when she did, the look in her eyes had nothing to do with him and everything to do with running. Kane, satisfied that the gears were turning, began pressing for visible returns that would inch him closer to the fantasy he called inevitability. He wanted an early read on a philanthropic anchor project that Victoria was preparing to announce, not because he cared where the money went, but because a hint of impropriety in a charity is a headline that sticks longer than a missed quarter. He wanted a sense of the board's appetite for advisory rotation, the kind of bureaucratic housekeeping that can be reframed as loss of confidence in a leader. He wanted a night of leak that would embarrass Victor without harming the company irreparably, a surgical cut that produced public blood and private leverage. To ensure obedience, he idled the threat, most precisely. A caller ID she would recognize without ever having saved the number. A man with a voice that could freeze her on a sidewalk because it carried years of intimacy and the ire of control. A photograph taken last week on a street she thought he would never know. Forwarded to Kane and then to her as proof that distances are porous. And because every tyrant worries not about failure, but about defection, Kane dangled an allowance dressed as benevolence. Cash to move money that cannot be traced back, transport arranged by a third party if she needed to be seen somewhere, she wasn't, a promise that if she delivered him Victor's stumble, he would let the husband drift back into the world and search in circles that never converge. Subscribe our channel for more latest update. The kindness was counterfeit. The leash was real? The question of confession did not go away. It gathered mass. Clare could not decide whether the fastest way to stop a rumor is to stand in front of it and name it, or whether in a town that feasts on scandal, naming is simply an accelerant. Tell Victoria and she risks becoming the woman who betrayed twice, once by arriving under a story crafted for acceptance, and again by altering the story only when exposure was certain. Tell Kyle and she risks injuring the one person whose quiet attention has made her feel seen rather than studied. He would not punish her, not first. But his face would change and something uncomplicated would be gone. Tell no one. And she continues to live with the siren in her pocket and the dread that accompanies any knock on the door. After 10, she weighed another variable that cut deeper than the rest. The marriage itself. It was not romance interrupted. It was control fled. There had been vows and there had been violence. Not always physical, but always enclosing. A tightening that left days narrow and nights wide awake. And when she slipped her ring off for the last time and put it in the velvet square she now kept in a hidden drawer, she had sworn to herself that no one would ever again be entitled to the geography of her life. To confess was to give that man back his shadow inside her house. To hide was to let Kane rent space in her mind. Between those evils, she kept walking because the only way out she trusted was the one she could build with her own hands, slowly, invisibly. While everyone else in this intense episode of The Young and the Restless, Clare's long-guarded secret about her true identity begins to unravel. Clare, who had meticulously constructed a false persona as Victoria Newman's daughter, faces exposure when Kane Ashby discovers her hidden past. Kane, a master manipulator with his own ambitions to undermine Victor Newman's empire, uncovers that Clare is not Victoria's biological daughter and that she has a husband from her previous life, a man who is still looking for her. Using this explosive information as leverage, Kane corners Clare into becoming his informant within the Newman family. Despite her tears and apparent submission, Clare's inner turmoil reveals a fierce determination not to remain Kane's pawn forever. She is forced into a dangerous alliance, feeding Kane insider information on the Newman family's strategic moves, boardroom intrigues, and personal dynamics. Kane's ultimate goal is to destabilize Victor's position and seize control of the empire himself. Clare's compliance is a survival tactic, but she harbors a deep resentment and a plan to reclaim her autonomy. Meanwhile, Clare's secret circulates quietly throughout Genoa City, sensed by those close to her, including Kyle, Victoria, Victor, Nikki, and others, each interpreting her behavior through their own lenses of concern, strategy, or suspicion. The tension escalates as Clare weighs whether to confess her truth to Victoria or Kyle. Neither option offering clear relief but rather the risk of devastating fallout. She also struggles with the trauma of her past marriage, a relationship marked by control and fear, which she has tried to leave behind. The episode ends with Clare caught between the threat Kane wields over her and the possibility of exposure. Determined to survive and one day turn the tables on Kane, the stakes in Genoa City have been irrevocably raised, setting the stage for a high-stakes power struggle, intertwined with personal betrayal and the search for identity. Clare's carefully constructed identity as Victoria Newman's daughter is on the verge of collapse. Kane Ashby discovers Clare's secret past and uses it as leverage to control her. Clare is coerced into spying on the Newman family to undermine Victor's empire. Clare's past marriage, marked by control and fear, adds complexity to her current predicament. The secret begins to leak. Sensed by key characters like Kyle, Victoria, and Victor, Clare's internal struggle is a mix of fear, anger, and a resolve to regain control. Clare faces a painful choice: confess her truth or keep living under Kane's shadow. ### Key insights. Identity as power and vulnerability. Clare's fabricated identity initially grants her access and acceptance, but also creates an immense vulnerability. Her struggle highlights how identity in the Newman family is both a shield and a potential weapon when secrets unravel. This duality drives much of the tension in the narrative, illustrating the fragile nature of constructed personas in high-stakes environments. Kane Ashby's role as a master manipulator. Kane's discovery of Clare's secret is not motivated by loyalty or compassion but by strategic self-interest. His ability to exploit secrets and manipulate others underscores a recurring theme in The Young and the Restless. Power often comes from understanding and weaponizing the vulnerabilities of others. Kane's long-term campaign against Victor Newman reveals the calculated and ruthless nature of corporate and personal power struggles. The burden of secrets. Clare's secret is a heavy burden that isolates her even as it connects her to danger. The narrative shows how secrets in Genoa City rarely remain contained. They spread, mutate, and affect relationships, causing ripple effects that touch many lives. This dynamic creates an atmosphere of suspicion and paranoia, where trust is scarce, and everyone is a potential informant or threat. Complexity of Clare's past marriage. The mention of Clare's husband and the controlling, violent nature of their relationship adds depth to her character and her motivations. It reveals that her life in Genoa City is not just about social status or family, but about survival and reclaiming autonomy. The trauma she carries informs her decisions and emotional responses, making her predicament more than a mere plot device, but a human story of escape and resilience. Moral ambiguity and survival. Clare's reluctant agreement to Kane's demands illustrates the moral ambiguity central to the show's conflict. She is neither a villain nor a victim but a complex character navigating impossible choices. Her decision to cooperate with Kane is pragmatic, driven by fear and the instinct to survive, yet it plants seeds for future resistance and redemption. This nuance enriches the narrative by avoiding simple good versus evil dichotomies. The social ecosystem of Genoa City. Multiple characters: Victoria, Victor, Kyle, Nikki, Nate, Audra, Phyllis, and Billy are perceptive to the of Clare's distress. Their varied reactions, ranging from strategic calculation to genuine concern, reflect the layered social and emotional networks in the show. This interconnectedness amplifies the stakes as personal and professional lives overlap, making every secret potentially explosive. Foreshadowing of a power struggle. Kane's detailed plan to destabilize Victor Newman's empire through strategic leaks and internal sabotage sets the stage for a prolonged power struggle. Clare's role as his informant becomes a critical pivot point, highlighting how intimate betrayals can influence broader corporate and social dynamics. The episode foreshadows intense confrontations ahead, where control over information and loyalty will determine the fate of Genoa City's most powerful family. This episode deepens the complexity of The Young and the Restless by intertwining personal secrets with corporate intrigue, illustrating how fragile identities and alliances are in a world driven by ambition and survival. Clare's story, marked by fear, hope, and defiance, serves as a compelling focal point for the unfolding drama that will challenge loyalties and reshape the power landscape.